Ningje Chimbe Zede Ningme Shin Sune Malam Chimbo Ngabjadab Pegara Darnga Sendo Ningje Chimbe Zede Ningme Shin Sune Malam Chimbo Ngabjadab Pegara Darnga Sendo Chirmen Do Demba Tuje Chinla Cha Lo Nye Cholong Peme Dongbo Le Jalwe Namchul Rangshin Tunje Zhub Cenzo Beji Yunden Co Barwa Pema Jungne Dan Le Be Cor Jong Dojo Tome Aryan Dewa Dan Yinye Cholang Chuge Chao Be Xiang Yunden Yue Dan Xiang Jie Yue La So Kenzo Chungni Nam La Solwa Debe Ma Yue Senge Kamge Rikbe Me Sidre Longne Cengzing Kun Sek Jiang Chambe Paljuru Tuzere Kunye Pa Rongsum Chuje Sangbo Gyal Juro Eche Kangri Tokala Rinchen Ningbe Kolo Yunden Kunjung Kawe Gesaldo Ningbe Dendo Bembe Najuro Pa Longchen Ramjam Shabla Soloba Debe Redong Jambale Shune Chenlam Le Gongbe Longne Bobe Terje Jol Longdo Chöze Janzo Nga Wangjuro Mipam Jamyang Namjal La Solowa Debe Homen Chöje Inge Pojang Ne Dusum Sangje Kunje Ngoni Rangsum Chogo Ngunsum Donze Ba Zawe Lamme Shabla Solowa Debe Yang Deyang Jowa Namgi Tada Nyambe Simjen Tamje Dungal Yunde Nyedang Jalde Topja Lana Meba Yang Dakbar Zobe Sangye Ye Gopang Rinpo Che La Gupar Kiwo Di Chedu La Dambi Chu Denye Senjin Sulishindo Nyamsu Lambara Kiwo Nyambe Samba Changju Chodo Tokeba Rinpo Che Saltabe Gone Sembara Shu.
At the beginning of class, please give rise to the precious bodhicitta, the supreme motivation. Thinking, may all sentient beings who are as numerous as the sky is vast attain perfect and complete Buddhahood. And in order to free them from suffering and the causes of suffering, may I really establish them at the level of complete and perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do so, may I listen to these precious teachings and put them correctly into practice. With that kind of motivation and the according conduct, please listen to the teachings.
So, tene gang shuwar chawe chue tene jumi pam rinpoche zebi kebi tsula jubi go she chabi ten juice ta tini imbare ta dila yang tangbo tenju dege chen tene koncho sumla changsalwa tene ta chobar joba lamnang chagido tene zambar tamchawa tene trashiba melams kang lamnang chagido tsikjeshi nangla tyonde do joja tamje tyonke ushapji tyobitön tende ta tene mala yang rimba shindu tene shungi tyon lebidos ne tenangla tanda shungi tyonde lepteyore.
The text that we're studying in this class is The Gateway to Knowledge by Mipam Rinpoche. And there were some preliminary topics that we covered, like the text, the title of the text, the homage to the 3 jewels, then the supplication verses, or the verse which contained auspicious aspirations, or we can also say that it was the verse of paying respect to Manjushri, and it also contained the promise to compose and the summarized topics of the entire text. So that was the verse that we looked at, and then we also looked at the summary of the text itself, and now we have reached the actual text, the main part of the text.
Tene dila yang tene kasata tiwa shi yore tiwa de ta chagya shi dönne rola dön sikdün time chörab nang vi deres dan sikdün time chörab nang vi dere kap de la tene chagya shi dönde kandes tengeres na tene chagya shi dönde ne soso yang dapa rikpa shi ngone tengeres de soso yang dapa rikpa shi de ane todang tos salbo chine kande ina 당공지 숭숭이나 로래하고시라 메토마송 도단칸데이나 지 숭로 나운스네 때들오시니 저와시네데레 따디게 렌데 소소 양답을 소소 양답을 쉐와데네 식소소 양답을 된 소소 양답을 최소소 양답을 보바소소 양답을 디시리 명라 아니 소소 양답을 시스 당보 식소소 양답을 쉐와데네 아니 조 죄제되기 마 죄행게 죄제 책죄라 디명라데 책소소 양답을 바스 다디 산제의 창주 선바 남기 아니 소소 양답을 바시 권의 최송 용도 책소소 세와되기 책되기 아니 책되라 페나 제 타와카다기 차자시 더우데 최송 용도 갑텔라 되기 책되라 아니 도와 랑랑 소소게 라루 느진 나소바 랑랑 소소게 라 숭투바당 죄제데 아니 책들라 체바 학보 균 아니 딘데 가양 매비보네 되는 죄제데 다든데 숭투게 베다 죄제되기 명라 책 소소 양답을 바스 되네 된 소소 양답을 바스 된 소소 양답을 바시와 되네 다디 죄제되기 되게 된데래 네, 배나 따와까다기 차자시 저 된데 된데 된데라 양 안에 된데 양 닭바르 도신 양 닭바르 도신 딜라 안에 마도바당 로바르도바당 태숨 된데 자와니 메바 안에 된 코롱게 내루 차자시 배나 차자시 된데 따와까다기 차자시 된 강임바 다랑 마노르와 안에 된데 tukla yobe ane tila ane den soso yang da bejik bas no dene tichela je chö soso yang da bejik bas na ta de chik dima me ba ane chik soso yang da bejik ba dang ane den la dima me ba den soso yang da bejik ba lamna jigri yana jeja dang jeje lamna jigra ta ondi den de ane semjen la ane 디 코롱기 내당 간데 임바 그러한 죄자도 죄자 코롱기 만노로에 된 지마메바 강데 임바 다랑 섬진라 마 뜸바르 제베나 아니 된 소소 양답을 바스 다 뽑아 소소 양답을 바스 뽑아 소소 양답을 바시와데 드네 죄제당 죄자 된족이 책당 된 된족이 아니 낭와 기 따때르침 보여 봐스 낭와기 때르침 보여서는 때르세인데 딱 조에메 와게 저러지로 와 세바메 바데네 죄자당 죄제기 아니 지 된된조게 낭와 된된조게 된다된조 로라 망보지 여바게 제 세메 바드니 다 셰여베 된다라오지 어딘데 뽑아서서 양다 버지 지 뽑아서서 양다 버지 바스 어딘데 다 뽑아들라 양 에나다 뽑이 때르침 뭐 게스는데 양 다시니 에와 짤 용기도 와
Before we start with the explanation of the text today, I would like to answer a question that was asked. Someone mentioned that they would like to have some clarification on the fourfold correct discrimination. We saw the verse in the prologue saying, comprehending perfectly the 10 topics, you teach beings the meaning of the 4 seals. Treasure, who fully illuminates the teachings of flawless word and meaning. Son of speech, may you enter our hearts. And the third line here refers, when it says the teachings of flawless word and meaning, this refers to the fourfold correct discrimination, which is the way in which here Manjushri teaches and explains the 4 seals of Dharma. And someone requested that we clarify what these 4 correct discriminations are again. they are the words, the definitive language, the meaning, the Dhamma, and ready speech or courageous eloquence. And what do these four refer to? The first one, the definitive words, the language, refers to the means of expression, that which expresses the meaning. And so what is to be taught, what is to be expressed are the four seals in our context, for example. And when the Buddha taught the four seals, then he did so with the perfect, flawless language. So in whatever language the four seals are being taught, it is the words that are being used are flawless in the sense that with the correct discrimination of words or language, one can teach in whatever language is necessary, whether it's the language of humans, the different languages of humans, the language of Nagas, the language of the gods, and so on. And with it, while teaching, there are no extra words, there are no words left out, there are no flaws at all in the expression of the four seals itself. The correct discrimination of the meaning then refers to the fact that the one who expresses the four seals, for example, can do so in a perfect way because of having understood the four seals correctly and authentically, without any aspects that are not understood or that would be misunderstood, without any doubts and misunderstandings. So the one who teaches or expresses the four seals with the right discrimination of the meaning has correctly and flawlessly understood the meaning of the four seals. Then the third correct discrimination is the correct discrimination of the Dhamma. And that refers then to the utterance or the way of teaching the words and the meaning, so that using the words, the correct words, to express the correct meaning, that were number 1 and 2, for sentient beings. So to teach the four seals, for example, for the benefit of sentient beings uninterruptedly. And then the last of the four correct discriminations is the correct discrimination of ready speech or courageous eloquence. And when we speak about this ready speech, courageous eloquence, we also refer to the treasure minds, the 8 great treasure minds of eloquent speech. And if you have the image of a treasure, a great treasure mine in our mind, then this refers to something that is inexhaustible, right? A great treasure mine that produces the treasure on and on. And what this means for for the teaching of the 4 seals of Dhamma means that the person who teaches it has really the understanding and everything in their mind, so they are able to teach eloquently and without interruption all the time. They know so much that they just are like a treasure mine, teaching them the Dharma, the seals of Dharma, to beings. And in this context, we also often speak about what makes up this eloquent speech in light of the 8 great treasure mines of eloquent speech.
Dine de pobi terchimbo ge sene da chole yobaz da pobi terchimbo ge pena poba sene pen chajashi twende ane sim la yang chimba che me ba de chembi tersen do ani chajashi tawakata ki chajashi ki twende ane sabo yindang kanje ina ane gyachewa yindang kanje ina dinjesena 하고서나 로직이 tersen do 네, 디게 된 된도 소소 출리신도 또 외반나 아니양 지 추기 때르센도 되는데 자원인의 점바 맞는 심리 대외반나 양숭 점바 미제바 짐바르 제베나 숭기 때르네도 다디로 때 되네 셈젠라 노출 자원인의 미비고네 되네 렉바르 셰베 제톰나 디 포비 때르도 되네 따와가다기 차자시 마임바 추 마임바 따와가다기 차자시랑 양다버 짐버데나 아니 추기 때라도 되네 데이터 추된 냠nen치네 랑니 상게네 신심진 텐존라 디기 된데 양양 땜비고네 되네 동지 리규 바르마체바 다 산제기 남니 남나 드에게 리규 추기 주바든도 바르마체마 군주 장주기 셈게 때라도 되네 데 출신도 랑게 냠nen치네 안에 지 문도 교토와에 다지 문도 교류베나 단디 동비 때선디로시네 뽑이 때친 뭐 예스 단지 시와델라 안에 뽑아서서 양답을 바스 딜라 안에 따와가다기 찾아시기 안에 된된조 낭와스래도 제로 낭와스는 낭당대암 다디기 된데 로라 샤르당 디기 된데 심라 요당데 간에 뽑이 때친 뭐 게되게 조비고네 베나 템바 베나 로드 베나 추 베나 숨 다나신 뽑아 다나신 군조 장조 셈 다나신 게 되네 조바 추 딘데스는 툭라 요테베나 다디 낭와스 다디 똑바디 때르낭신 레스 라이도스
So we said that the ready speech or courageous eloquence is explained in light of the 8 great treasure mines of courageous eloquence. And that refers to the way that they appear in the mind of the one who teaches, for example, the 4 seals of Dhamma, the Gtk seals. And so by again and again remembering the meaning and the words of the 4 seals, then one has remembrance. By knowing the full extension of how these are profound and vast, if one knows the entire profound meaning of these 4 seals of Dhamma, then this refers to the aspect of intelligence or wisdom. Then if one really realizes the meaning of the entire teachings, specifically here the 4 seals, then this is comprehension. If one recalls it without leaving anything else, without leaving anything out, then, and having perfectly internalized it, this is the recall. Being able to teach the 4 seals and just the Dhamma in generally continuously, being able to teach like this is then courageous eloquence. And to teach them for the benefit of sentient beings refers to the Dhamma. Then the seventh great treasure mine is enlightenment, and that refers to the fact that if one upholds the teachings in this way, if one teaches the four seals of Dhamma in this way, the bloodline or the lineage of the Buddha will be uninterrupted. So the tradition will be uninterrupted, and there will be people who continuously practice. And then the last one is accomplishment.
Tempa, lote, tokpa, ane sung, the popa lesson, popa, digela tene, che so yandama, digela tene, kunzop changju sem, digela tene, drubi terz, tamadela.
Drubeter de la Dejikandes Nangai.
Drubeter de la Tawakata ki chaja shigi dende rangi nyamlen cheni undu njurba.
And the last is the great treasure mine of accomplishment. And that means that one has completely, through practicing these, has completely been able to manifest or realize the meaning of the four seals of Dhamma. So these are the 8 great treasure mines, and this is a way of presenting how they appear in the mind, how they are present in the mind of the one who teaches or is to teach the 4 seals of Dhamma, or the Dhamma in general. And if these 8 aspects that we have just enumerated are present, then the mind of the one who teaches the 4 Dhammas is really like a treasure mine, and will be able to produce the teachings, like teach the teachings uninterruptedly.
Yes. Tiring macho da zo kenjugi tanda de jeja de ane kebine ju ane chugi domshi ane soso yang da bri ba shis odindes ne yebe nang ta tanda tangbo ane kebine juice ane kebine jugi nang ne yang ane tanda phungbo la khebas ta di kabla lek de re phungbo la keja shebi kaptela yang ane ta phungbo de la ena namba ngas je sugi phungbo chore phungbo duji gi phungbo duje gi phungbo number shebi phungbos odinde nga yebe nangne te tambo sugi phungbos din mala ta dangong tangbo ngenda sugi phungbo rakpa chore phungbo dile sugle kyang chorwa de dos chau dile kyang duje de dos chau dile kyang duje de dos chau dile kyang namshe de pe chau lamsang jigla thong ma tuwa ngoshe ma tuwa lamsang jigla ha kwe kale khabo dinde yoba tharang ge koni ta rakpa de tambo ngola tende lokjung changshi tene thawa la juwe tharang ge gorim ge taw tene dinde sungwa redo dinde tanda sugi phungbo de la ta phungbo nangne kyang tene phungbo sugi phungbo ko la yes.
So today, now we will continue with our explanations of the gateway to knowledge. And the gateway to knowledge is outlined by these 3 topics, by these 3 sections. The 10 topics of learnedness, of knowledge, the 4 seals of Dhamma, and the 4-fold correct discrimination. Out of these 3 sections, we have started to discuss the first one yesterday, the the 10 topics of learnedness. And out of these 10 topics, we have started with the first one, the aggregates. The aggregates is further, the chapter on the aggregates is further divided into the 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness. And we started a little bit to talk about the aggregates and going towards the aggregate of form. Before we go into the text, into the section about form, I would like to mention, though, that actually the order of the aggregates is based on the fact that the prior ones are more coarse than the later ones. This means that the aggregate of form is something that we can comprehend very easily. We can easily relate to it through our experience. We can easily think about it and understand it. Understanding sensation is already a little bit more difficult because it's a more subtle kind of topic. Even more subtle than that then is perception, even more subtle than perception is formation. And the most subtle of the 5 aggregates is then consciousness, which is extremely difficult to understand because it's very hard to put our finger on what this actually is and how to correctly understand it. So the order in which we're studying the 5 aggregates here is based on the fact that if we first start with the aggregate of form, that's the most coarse or more graspable object, so that we then move to the more subtle topics afterwards.
데라 숙수롱위 체니 젠게 풍보 데라스 에나스 따들을 송래 데디 데라 숙수롱와 선데기 풍 수기 수기 풍보기 체니데 된 땡기도 숙수롱와 스타디 숙수롱와스네 강 라비바디 콜라양 마오네 lep기도 데네 단다드루 숙수롱와스인데 딱 수기 풍보기 체니데다 수기 체니데 suks pungbo kabla shewe gede suki tsinye de suks rungwa yins ten sungre suks tsinye chenye pungbos suki pungbo telas tene enas gyusuk she tang jesuk chukchi kos ta pungbo ngayi nangne tangbo suki pungbo digi tsinye de she ta dila ewa rao ma che na jera rao che na gyusuk she nang ane jesuk chukchi yos 나는 죽지 강라 아니 시감나 정아 수기 풍보들라에나 다 용돔 정아도와 주숙 시당 지수 죽지
If we now look at the aggregate of form, and we are on page 16 of our text, then the explanation starts with the definition of the aggregate of form, which reads here, the aggregate of what is defined as physical forms. So the definition of form is that it is defined as physical forms. We will hear more about what this definition refers to later on. We will talk about what it means to be defined as physical form, or a different way of translating the definition would be what is suitable to be form. So that which is defined to be suitable to be form is form, and we will see what this refers to, what this really means later on. But first of all, it's just good for us to know the definition of the aggregate of form. So the definition is that which is suitable to be form. And that can be subdivided into the 4 causal forms and the 11 resultant forms. So form, the aggregate of form, has been defined now, and now we're looking at its divisions. How can we classify it? We can classify it into the 4 causal forms and the 11 resultant forms. Together, that makes then 15 different kinds of forms.
Tene nganzo tanda chedang ngomba la che sanje ge che ngomba gi che singye la ngomba la changde ga la ta tang pe cha shana tangbo khebe ne chu ra la yang de la yang je ena tangbo phungbo la ena yang ger nga la tene yang de su sha yang su la yang ger ena ju su shi de su ju de ne re ene ta de ne ma du ge de chu ngomba gi to dang de o de ne yores chu tanda chu ngomba chu dulwa chu to de ne yoro wa tanda de ne su ta chu ngomba gi to dang de o de ewa mama re ewa chin ho de ta lu chung chang dang de ta to dang de o de ne su ge de chi ne ta tan de zo chewa ngomba gi kong do yin du ta de ne ma pe gi dos timala.
Actually, the gateway to knowledge is a Abhidhamma text that belongs to the Abhidhamma teachings, or the category of teachings of the Abhidhamma. And this is really the style that we find in the Abhidhamma. The Buddha taught 3 baskets. There are 3 baskets or 3 pitakas that we divide the teachings into. The first one is the Vinaya, the second one is Sutra, and then the third one, the Abhidhamma. And the style of the Abhidhamma is that it breaks things down in this way. So first we see that in order to become learned, we have the 10 topics of learnedness. The first one of those is the topic of the aggregates. The aggregates can be divided into 5 aggregates. The first one of those is form. Form can be divided into the 4 causal and the 11 resultant forms. And so on, and so on. So this is the style of the Abhidhamma teachings.
Da yusuk shi de ne kabla gyune jungwa chimbo shi de da yusuk shi la de kabdela de shung pechana la gyune jungwa chimbo shi de nan de yusuk sin ne jungwa chimbo shi de la beres da de la jus na kansung re do sana jus na da desuk chukchibo de ane jungwa chimbo ane shi de le kebar chebe be na jus ane ji desuk chukchibo de ane ji yusuk shi de la ane ten ne tewa ane ji shi do chani tewe na jus ane desuk chukchibo de ane yud jungwa chimbo shi de la ane ne tewe na jus ane yusu shi de me sona desu chukchi tenzo mejungwa kola tenne chungyo na ane yus ane tanda desu chukchi po de mangbo pele dang dinde tamje yang de yusuk chimbo shi de chewe na kola yus ngende o dinde chula yus ne sungido ine jungwa chimbo shi se jungwas ane jungwas나 desu chukchibo denzo gyu tele tenne chungi yobena jungwas ane jungwas ane Tine the yusu shibu de la shenyang jungwa sene lab kowa de ane simjengi rana simjengi legi wangi de jungwa chimbo shi de chung yinbe na jungwa as wadinde sene gyuni jungwa sene tine rido.
So if we first look at the causal forms, then we should look at what makes them causal. Why do we call them the causal forms? These are the four elements. In the text it says causal forms are the four primary elements. So first of all, why do we call them causal? Why are they causes? They're causes or they're causal because of a few different ways we can look at these elements, the four primary elements, in the way that they constitute the basis and so on for the resultant forms to arise. So the four causal forms, they constitute the causes which make the resultant forms arise. They are the cause for the resultant forms to be supported. They're the foundation for resultant forms to exist. They also are the base. They make they cause the resultant forms to abide, and they are also the constituents of the supported. So of they're the constituents of the resultant forms, and they cause any increase, any flourishing, or any increase of resultant forms. So in this way, they do constitute the cause, from different angles that we can look at it, they constitute the cause for the resultant forms. That's why we call them the causal forms. And why do we call them elements? It's because they are elements, they're parts of everything. They're aspects or they're elements that constitute all the resultant forms. And another way to look at it is they also called the elements because they're the elements of arising that arise due to the karma of sentient beings since beginningless time. So based on that, there is this continuous appearance of the four elements.
네. 중화 첨보 시대 첨보 네. 된 이제 제수 된족의 제수 죽지보되게 시 된사 안에 배 갸첨보 된데 임베나 제수 첨보 제수 죽지보되 된사리로와 된사 임베게 또 첨보세 되갈라다지 시암다 뇌도 뇌체 잘라룩사게 뇌체도 답에 제수 죽지스나 배 갸첨보로와 제수 축지보 함제 숑사게 네 첨보 임반나 신게라 땐양 콜라 유수시딜라 첨보스네 나바레스 아니 셴양 제수 축지보 가와 연나양데 유수시디기 캡되어야다 안테인데 코미나양 첨보 나바레스 아니 유수 첨보데 가와라 이제 연나양 안텔라 제수 주지의 내 대여배나 안에 대 첨보스 다 첨보도 된다 어딘데도
We call them the primary elements. And an alternative word translation here would be the great elements. Why do we call them primary or great? it's because they're really the basis, the support for all the resultant forms to arise, and therefore they are actually extremely vast. They're great. They're extremely important, or like they are present everywhere. They're the very foundation for all resultant forms without exception. So that's why they're so vast, and that's why they are vast in terms of they're everywhere. And if we think of it as a vessel that holds all resultant forms, then it's huge, right? It's great, it's huge, it's vast, because all the resultant forms fall into the vessel of being held by, or they exist because of the primary elements. And we can also think of them as great, as very vast, because wherever we go, whatever we look at, this is pervaded by the elements. There's no place we can go, nothing we can look at that is not pervaded by the elements. So in this way, we can say that because they're really the primary building blocks of everything, of all form, of all resultant form, then these primary elements are the great elements.
네, 때때는 시대에서 중앙 윤의 중앙 정보 시대에서 시유스 다디 교수시도 수술에라나 강강대래람나 되네 사추 멜롱 디시부데레 단디 시부데기 양 라랑 수수기 천예당 지레든서 양호네 레기도.
So and if we ask then what are these four? We said there are four primary elements, right? What are these four? The four are earth, water, fire, and wind. And the definition of each also follows now below.
사이 감네 사싱스 때데 천이데레 안에 시 점바르 집에 레제바스는 데데 안에 거기 젤레데 내가 지당데 안에 사생다 베 척보데레스 사싱 책바스다 안에 거기 젤레데 가르르스는 뭐보든도 탐제마 사도 마주니 고야 진네 심네 대교레스 야 땡네 대교레 라비케차.
The first of the four primary elements is earth. And here it says the earth element is solidity and its function is to support. So solidity is really the definition of what this earth element refers to. It means it is hard. And to be the support is its function. It hinders things from just falling into thin air. It supports things.
네, 니바 추이 감네 추이 랑신데 천니데 가르레람나 셰르와스 렌신 셰르와스 아니 거기 젤레데 마 토르도 마중네 추 루그룩스에 당신 어딘데스 deux bases dene déjà la main rangende 조 차우데레스 매 친니데 아니 거기 제레 내가 가르치 그랬으나 주 민그 주게레스 베나 신도 된조양 최를 주게 라우 나 베나 수고 된조 야야 체르체르 죄도 되네 단다 최에게래 민밀레 같이 그랬어 때 룽기 감되게 룽기 친니데 양신 요와스 구제 땅 대화나지 땅저 단다 강당 강이나 구제 땅에 요와데 베나 파추드에 요와데 베차샤나 강당 강 구제 땅에 요와데 탐제 룽유에 된다게 제스 룽 양시 요와 되게 되네 펠와르제 스디가라 되네 야마 요비고네 아니 고 망도 땅에 정치 그러 어딘데기 내가 지기도 쓰는 제레드 천년지당 제레지 천년지당 제레지 되는 시도 그런 거지 바고.
The water element is then the second one. The water element is fluidity and cohesion. Water is defined to be wet and fluid, like wetness and fluidity. And the function that it has is that it causes cohesion, meaning it brings things together and holds things together. Fire, then, the fire element is defined as hotness and burning. And and the function that this has is that it brings things to ripening. That means that fruit, for example, comes to ripening, and physical bodies grow, and anything that comes to ripening comes into maturation is based on this element of fire, which is heat, and which is
되네
let's go. And the wind element is defined as that which is motion. So it's defined as motion, and its function is to allow expansion. So motion means that any kind of movement that we see, things going back and forth, any kind of movement like that is based on the wind element. That's its definition. And that kind of movement allows that things expand, that they increase in number or size, and so on. So that's the wind element. And what we have seen is that in our text, these are always described by first the definition and then also the function of each of these elements.
되네 제 교수시 꼴라 슈스네 되네 니바 제수코네 제숙 죽지 제우숙데 제우숙 본고데라야나 죽지여스 왕봉아 미그나나체 루스네 왕봉아 당 되는가스 속자 지로 렉자스 딩아 디추 주치 안에 제 몸바 저기 룩소라 네 로베 인이 이제베 몸바 저기 룩소라 안에 넘버 레체 멤버 숙스 디샤네 죽지 차기도스 아니 양 몸바 군두 로베 토미게 제베 몸바 군두 길룩소 따나 양 옹봉아다 되는가 되기 땡둘라 양 최기 깨체 바이 속생 이제 데데샤네 아니 죽지 차기도스 다간다라 개발데 몸바 저기 룩사 넘버 레체 마이베 속디샤 죽직스 양 몸바 군두 따도 양 옹봉아다 되는가 땡둘라 양 최기 깨체 바이 속스 데데샤네 죽직스 다 속죽직 지당데 다 nga chude da tawre ane chema de rana so re tos marare re shane intende tsinando.
After having completed the 4 causal forms, then we can move on to the discussion of the 11 resultant forms. And the 11 resultant forms are first the 5 sense faculties, which are eye, the nose, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. Then the 5 sense objects, so visible form, sound, smell, taste, and tangible objects, or fabrics, and so, or textures. And this is the same in all traditions. We have the 5 faculties, sense faculties, and the 5 sense objects. Then the 11th of the 11 resultant forms depends, the explanation of that depends on which tradition we're following. So in the Abhidhamma Kosha by Vasubandhu, the 11th resultant form is described as imperceptible forms, and Asanga in the Abhidhamma Samuccaya speaks about mental objects or the sense source of dhammas. And so while the first 10 resultant forms are the same, there are slight differences in identifying the 11th resultant form.
Di chela surungwa de suki tsingin yin sene tani yakang la dine sungre. De ta de surungwa singin de kande yinbe kola dinma sungidu. Supung de ta rekpa dang jebi go ne susu yobari shaades. Rekpa dang sena lakpa la soba ki rekpa tukpa rekpa dawgi dinde dang. Jeba sena samlogi rekpa ki samlogi indes chi samlogi go ne takche daw samlogi nang la sharwa dawji. Dinde ki jebi go ne susu rungwa sene dinde shagi yobari shaades.
And we said previously that the definition of form is that it is suitable to be form. And here now comes the meaning of that. On page 17, the paragraph 1.6 says, these form aggregates are defined as having form by means of contact or inference. So when something is something that has form, then, or that is suitable to be form, then there are 2 ways of coming to a conclusion about that. One is that objects are something that we can touch, that we can experience. For example, by touching it, coming into contact with it with our hand. That is one aspect of the aggregate of form. If it's something we can grasp with our hand, that we can touch with our hand, then it is form. And the other way of finding it is through inference, like defining what is form is through inference. So if it is something that can arise as an image in our mind, if we can analyze it through our thinking and come to a conclusion about it as a thing, then if it arises in the mind through our analysis, then that's also form.
Tene de la tangbo rekba de kola sungido tangbos lakpa dang yukpa dang lung soke tukre yopa dang ta suksurungwa sing tonda de karire sena tonda nigi sungi yos rekpa dang chebe ko ta tambo rekpa sena lakpa dang sa ta ngajo lakpa ki regne rege yowa den ra lakpa ki chokche la regne chokche la rege yopa pecha shana rawa ani yukpa dang sena yukpa den ki gyapna ani yukpa ki dungna penna tene ma soya ro yupa gi gyabe gi marpo shala tene penna chunda marpo chungya do penna tati thuge rekpa yobara penna lungi ane changmo lebe yobara lungi chine kolak denzo tang tra denzo inde guje tang yoba tar sho denzo yogi yoba oti to ane pecha shana ta no sok de gi nang la penna me gi tsig na chubru tunya do penna rawa me gi tsagyoba penna lung changmo tang kawa kyakpa denzo ke chungsungna aneya pakpa ke kangla changmo ki buru tende changburu tuyen taw ra ane je tukul la so ba tul den zo mu ga da dan ki la so ba mu ga na yang ma tu ye yo wa to ta den zo rek ba sing de o tin de ki ton da res suk su rong wa sing de rek ba ki ton da de ta de tu ge dang je ge dang o da o tin de ki ton da ji la yang la bi res sung ga ren do 오래 신양 단지 아주 저거 도기도 와 저거 돈이 수군요도 저차 탕체 저 용기도 온된종 근데 수수롱와디 인비 된다데 어딘 제스 숨기도
So we said that forms can be defined both through context and inference, or touch and analysis. And first, here we find a discussion of contact. What does contact refer to? The first case refers to the fact that it can be touched by a hand, a stick, the wind, or by other things. So forms can be touched by, for example, a hand. Like we can touch our table with our hand. So that's then a form. Or it can be touched by a stick, meaning one can hit something or someone with a stick, and then that shows a result, like it creates a wound or a discoloration of our flesh. So that's a different kind of contact that happens and that has a certain result. So by being beaten like a stick, by being beaten by a stick, or that can lead to discolorations or wounds. Wind can also touch things, and we see that, we become aware of that because wind can move things around. So when the wind touches a flag, then the flag moves back and forth. When we come into contact with coldness, then the skin first might get goosebumps, and then cold blisters, and we might freeze. So these are all ways that we physically come into contact with different kinds of things, and therefore this constitutes contact, and that if something can come into contact with something else like that, it's form. Another example would be an inner experience. If we're touched by hunger and thirst, then our physical energy will diminish. We'll if we're hungry and thirsty, then we might get tired and sluggish. So these are all different ways of touch, of contact that happen.
Nipa nyambar shapam ma shapi yi tokche ke so tin titawo she tawre sungwe so da de nipa sri kala cheba bonela ra rekpa tan cheba ni wa cheba de nyambar shapam sen nyambar shapas na penang zo lu la yi xian chang mang bo na lu de la kingru ge namba la kombas na ni semla kingru namba komni tenya ni kingru semla share je ra on den zo de tawla ming na yang de jebi goni suk sing de jinde tang ham yana nyambar ma sha bi tok che ki pena sem nang la pumba awo kawa wo o tinde sen samlo la chi khurge yorwa o tenzo yi tok che ki suk pumba ne tinde je suk ip tinde sang gi pumba o ser gi pumba o la taw sambarwa tinde sen sem nang la pumba gi namba salworo chi trawara sungirwa ngondi ming la jebi suk sing o tinde res sungane
So that was then the way that things can be defined as the form aggregates or as aspects of form aggregates because they are something we can touch, come into physical contact with them. And the second case, the second kind of scenario that lets us define something as form is then to what is called here inference. Maybe we might think of it as analysis, examination, something like that. So the second case of inference implies a certain form can be clearly perceived as being such and such by either the composed meditative frame of mind or by the conceptual frame of mind not composed in meditation. So what this refers to is that one can clearly perceive through one's analysis certain objects. They arise in one's mind. So in meditation, for example, certain images can become very vivid and clear. If one has a lot of attachment and desire, then there is the meditation on the human body as a skeleton, as just the bones. And when the meditator, in the meditative absorption of the repulsiveness of the human body, by meditating on the body as a skeleton, perceives the body as a skeleton, that is then this analytical kind of form that arises in the mind of in the frame of mind of a meditator, or in meditation, in meditative absorption. Then there's another kind of mental object that can arise, an analytical form, which is conceptual while not being in meditative absorption. And so if anyone just thinks very hard, if one thinks about a vase or a pillar and tries to bring to mind a certain ways, whether it's a copper or a gold, and thinks about the vase, then its aspects become clearer and clearer, and the image of the vase arises in one's mind. So that kind of appearance, the arising of the vase in the mind, that also allows us to say that this is a form.
Di suksurungwa sende kante imbi kola di keche shusane gyusu shidian shusare ta desu chukchi di kola tene dela wangbo nga nese ta wangbo dela nga yus ta wangbo sana rangyul la wang chebe na wangbo ranan susu tanda wangbo nga meg na che ranan susu ki yul la wang chebe na ane wangbo slables di wangbo dela megi wangbo deshindo nai wangbo che wangbo lüji wangbo tende wangbo nga yus sumare.
So we have seen now the definition, the explanation of how we define things as form. What does it mean when we say it's suitable to be understood as form? It's through either being able to touch it or through being able to consider it through analysis. Not to consider, but for it to arise as an image in mind through our analysis. So these are the two ways that things can be categorized, that they can be identified as being form. And we have also already seen the causal forms, the four causal forms, and now we can move on to the 11 resultant forms. And those start with the 5 sense faculties. What is the definition of a faculty, of a sense faculty? It means that the 5 faculties are what take hold of or take possession of their individual objects. And when we divide the sense faculties, there are 5 of them. There's the eye, there's the ear, there's the nose, tongue, and the body faculties. So these are the faculties.
Wangbo ngabo tita rangi shepai se wangbo miki wangbo la sopa ngabo tensogi rang suzuki sheba miki wangbo ki sheba mikshe nai wangbo ki sheba nashe nai wangbo ki sheba nashe che wangbo ki sheba che she lue wangbo ki sheba lue she oti sheba tensogi 다보 치겐 이러와 셰바 된줄라 드네 다보 치겐 메게 셰바 될라 숙통에 치둘라 겐 로파 다보 치겐 다겐 베티나신 라랑 수수비 투몽 마임바 투몽 마임바세나 다페나 이제 믹셀기 코롱기 디 숙통에라 로바 지게 요베 개차라오지 믹셀기 디마 노에라 로바 지게 요가 투몽 마임바 딘데기 로바 지겐지 아니 딘데지 인스 딘데 남기 숙제인 당바데스 단 남기스나 아주 단다 미기 왕보스나 아주 단다 믹 단다 두루지 통되기도 하 믹라는데 지 리지도와 디디 마레스 디게 남라스 남기스 숙제 당와스 숙 임바직라 빼 짱마 이제 살보 빼 쇠보 라우지 예래 이렇게 자리 당바 때에
The 5 faculties are the particular ruling factors for their respective cognitions. So when we talk about the 5 sense faculties, the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, and so on, then they are what facilitates the arising of a certain cognition for the eye consciousness, for the ear consciousness, and so on. It's the ruling factor that allows the consciousness or the cognition to perceive the object. So the eye faculty is the ruling condition for the eye consciousness to arise. The ear faculty is the ruling condition for the ear faculty to arise. The nose faculty is the ruling condition for the nose consciousness to arise. The tongue is the ruling condition for the taste perceiving tongue consciousness to arise, taste consciousness to arise, and so on. So each of the faculties functions as the ruling condition for their own consciousness, the specific consciousnesses to arise. So that makes them specific. There are certain objects, sense objects, that they facilitate to be perceived by the respective consciousnesses. So they're specific. They're not all-encompassing. So they're the ruling conditions and they're specific. And so they're the ruling conditions for the respective cognitions. And then when we consider what they look like, what are the actual faculties, then the eye faculty itself is not the the eyeball that we can see like that in its entirety. No, here the eye faculty itself is described as a inner subtle form. So there's a very subtle form. There's very clear and vivid, subtle, transparent, clear form that's inside of the eye, and that thing is the actual eye faculty.
네. 단ang주디 샤이디 믹당 나당 되는 냄초 된조데 대 왕봉하게 된 내사자오시 시자사자오시 된데레 송에 왕된
our physical organs, our sense organs that are made up from flesh and so on, those are actually the support for the eye faculty, ear faculty, and so on to abide. So the eyeball or the ear, they are just the support for the actual sense faculty, which are these inner subtle forms.
네. 메기 왕보 sarme medo taus de wongbonga de kandeyo tindes deshen angere megi wongbo de penna medo sarma lagende chawyeres sarme medo sa sarme singinde gi medo de nangshi chonda tinga yimbaji la ane gogo nen tinde jyeres dana shenge na nai wongbo de 싱 조가선 싱지민나 싱 조가 라긴 주사래도 이 싱데라다 제르와 싱된도랑도 제르와 얘기도 앞에나 싱되게 tum데 싱 동보되게 이제 술술된데라 제르와 얘기도 안데 제르와 인데 주리 잡샤교는 신지 nenchok데 싱 조와기 제르와데 주리 잡샤교는 신지 유레스 아니 나이 공부대 상기 목합시바다우스 되네 상레 소샤교 캅 차우 된다는 수부 남네 존나네라 인데스네 초땅샤교도 된대요사데 상기 목합시바다우스 제 공부대 다와 라우지 젤레기 대 단다 젤레 텐데기 남로라 되네 다와 게 대반능 신도지 동자 충충제 교제사인데 다와 도지 임바지라 게 대교도지 충충지 류지 왕보 대배나 자렉나 잠기 빡빡다오스 자렉나 잠 신되게 빡빡 배녀고 잠보 tindeyo 사례는 디낭신신에 되는 류기 나란속에 나란속에 단다 땐게 류기 빡빡대 당 낭록 샤니기 parula pardela tene te luigi wangbo tare na jamgi bakata o sinde ti yobe kechando de ta wangbo na de wotindes muzina re.
How do we then understand these subtle forms that are the sense faculties that are based on the sense organs? We have examples here how they actually look like. The shape of the eye faculty is similar to the round and blue shape of the umaka flower. So the subtle form of the eye faculty, we can think of it to look like like this specific kind of flower, and when it blooms, it's round and blue. And the ear faculty is similar to the shape of a twisted roll of birch bark. They're sort of kind of tree, right? The tree, the birch tree, and around its trunk grows this special kind of bark, like the skin of the tree, and it rolls off into these fragments of twisted rolls of birch bark. So the ear faculty inside of the ear organ looks the same, looks like that. Then the nose faculty looks like two very thin copper needles that point outwards through the nose. And the tongue faculty then is like a half moon, like a just the sickling moon, like a moon sickle within the tongue. And it's probably quite small, actually. So when the moon is very young. And then the last one, so I didn't read them. The nose faculty is similar to the shape of parallel copper needles. The tongue faculty is similar to the shape of a crescent moon disk. And the body faculty all covering similar to the skin of the smooth to the touch bird. So the skin, the body faculty is present, doesn't have a specific form, but it's like the skin of a smooth to the touch bird. There's a bird that's extremely soft and pleasant to touch, and so it has this very special skin, and that's like the body sense faculty. And the way that we understand it is that it is in between our actual skin and our flesh. The body faculty is everywhere between our flesh on the body.
네. 니바데 되는가네스 제수 죽지나네 되는가데 강강이나 슈나 소타 지로 렉자스 딘조인스 근데 네 소데네 미기 율데스 미히기 숨자를 줄와 속이 개체기 챙이스 다든스 개체줘래 미기 숨에 줄와스 단다 대갑기 속데 당양 야강기 속 풍부의 값이 속되라 다 에와 체시 지고래 속이 풍부가 속데 캡친보 도지래도 봐 에시 도지 단다디 에와 제작 도지로 난디 속데나 단다디 속데 믹시기 양박이 숨에 말이지 야 강라 속된저나 타지도 믹시기 숨어자 많이 봐요 사례디 불라 대인도 갑라데네 다디 당보데 속니 믹기 율데스 다텔라 속데라 양에나 카독기 수당 서양 입기 수니스 다들라 카독들라 양 안에 자위 카독당 연락이 카독스 니샤레 카독 탐지기 중사대 자와들라 몬보 세르보 가르보 마르보데 자위 카독스 자와스는 중사대 탐지 카독 연락 카독 탐지 중사 디신스
So these were the 5 faculties, the sense faculties, and now the 5 sense objects are the second set of 5 in our 11 resultant forms. So the 5 sense objects are visible forms, sounds, odors, tastes, and textures. And they are defined to be the objects for the respective sense consciousnesses to arise. So, for example, visible form is the object for the eye consciousness. And here we have to be a little bit careful because it mentions forms. And in the translation, we already see the visible to clarify this, but in Tibetan, it's not, the visible is not explicitly mentioned. So it is called form, is the object of the I consciousness. We can't confuse this with the form aggregate. The aggregate of forms is more pervasive, is a umbrella term for all sorts of forms, while the form that we're speaking about here now as visible form is much more limited in its scope. So the aggregate of forms, the forms that we were speaking about generally as the aggregate of forms, that's the basis for any kind of division, while then the visible form that we see now here as the sense object is one of the divisions and subdivisions. So here we're only referring to the visible forms are the objects for the I consciousness, while the forms in terms of the aggregate of forms is much more pervasive, is a much more inclusive term, including also other kinds of forms, not only visible forms. I just wanted to clarify this here. Now, visible forms are the sense objects of the I. That's the definition. They can be divided into two types: color forms and shape forms, or colors and shapes. And concerning the first color form, the four primary colors are blue, yellow, white, and red. So we can divide visible forms into colors and shapes. And the colors are further divided into primary and secondary colors. The primary colors are blue, yellow, white, and red. And they're primary colors because they make up all other colors.
di yanla ki khato la tin dang namkhala tin chidwa de namkhala tin korong la labre tin korong ane ngazo me dang na duwa lengira duwa ane lung jamne thala dun ya namkhala churdikala thala chidwa dul ane khugna sena ane muk tanda de mukpa ane nabun 어떤 소리스 되네 님마게 왜 아니 님마 매비 깝게 데 dimna dimma 되네 님마 샤르데 깝게 양 낭와 양 체모 어떤 저 탐제 인양 연락하도 셰양 몬바르 깝요 바 셰바 숙셴기 고갑적이 요배는 몬바르 깝요 바 셰바 속대 숙셴라 토파르 제바당 렉바르 자와당 달대와 벤나 바낭라 꺄승에 제 바낭 벤나 낭와 저시도와 꺄승에 원딜랑 몬바르 까비비 숙스 숙년 된조 양 추능이 숙년 멜론나니 숙년 된조 양 대단 자오제스네 당 몬바르 까비비 숙스 숙생시 제도와 가도 면락 착살왔다우소 넘버를 제 ane tengi ngombo ngazo lo zambulengi tengi namkhali ngombo dokchido onten zoyang khado jipa namte de namjang suksu dubi chedula ane tachiran khado sena de suksu dubi chedula she yin la ke jaredo ngombo ka nas khado sugna na dubi sare 카톡이 쓰구나. 찬살마다 된서 카톡 쓰구나 두개나. 입기 쓰고 오그네레기라. 단다 카톡이 쓰고 셰디가.
So the secondary colors are cloudy and smoky and dusty and misty, sunny and shady, light and dark. These are then shadings, or like these are the colors that have to do that are included in color that have to do with, for example, the actual clouds, like the clouds in the sky, when they're those that's the falls into the category of color, that is refers to the form, the color form of cloudiness, of being cloudy. Smoky is the smoke, the color of the smoke from fire. Dusty is when we have a lot of wind and the dust is swirled up into the air. Misty comes from fog, like we have fog that's misty. Sunny when the sun shines, shady when there's shadow. Light during the day and dark is at night, the darkness at night. So these are the secondary colors. And on top of that, there are also some other things that are considered to fall into the category of color forms. So we have the primary ones, which are the actual colors that make up colors. And then we have these other things, right? And another thing that falls into color form, into the category of color form, is spatial form, which is a spatial form is a visible form, for example, pure, clear space, free from something tangible that impedes other things, reflections, and so forth belong to this type. So these are other things that we might perceive and fall into the category of color forms. Something else that we perceive in a similar way are perceptual forms, such as the act of prostrating, the uniformly colored blue sky, also said to be included on visible forms. So in the way of classifying these kinds of phenomena in the Abhidhamma, there are the primary forms, the secondary forms, the primary form colors, the secondary form colors, but also spatial form and perceptible forms, and they're all grouped together into this category of color forms. We see that because shape forms are still to come, so they do not. When we divide form into color and shape, they do not fall into shape, but they're grouped with the real colors into the color category.
진바 코롱 카도 아니 두아 코롱 카도 진바 이 카도 센틴데 인사 말이 두아 이 카도 센틴데 인사 말이 니마 이 카도 서버 센틴데 인사 말이 니마 그 코롱 카도 진바 코롱 카도 두아 코롱 카도 차살와 된절라양 넘버 리제 마인바스 인데 숙된 나좀 믹시기 송자를 줘봐 넘버 리게 요와 토틴데 믹스 마이나양 고 차사와 다우 딘데기 카도
So also the secondary colors, they're not the color of the sun or the color of the clouds per se. They are the cloudiness in itself. So they're not the gray of cloudy does not refer to the gray color of the cloud, but to cloudiness itself. The sunny would not refer to the yellow color of the sun, but to the brightness or the sunniness of the sun. So these are not really colors as we understand them, as of red, yellow, and so on, but they are objects of our eye consciousness. They're perceived by our eye consciousness, and therefore they're grouped into this category rather.
So 내로 참시하기는 되는.
I will stop here for today.
모에 추zul로디양 인데 jel고로신 초게 다주 건도 다주로데 로저 베모 rab도 제제 산제 템바 다르신 제바라에 쇼 장축 심조 렘보제 마제 번남 제주로제 제와 냠바 메바야 공내 공도 펠로와라 쇼 소남데예 탐제 세바니 톱네 예베 잔남 팜제 겐가 나제 발랍 투바 예시베 촌레 로와 롤로와라 쇼
I forgot again. So please write a magic word. That's the question for today. Please write a magic word. That's the question
I have
for today.
Inkala, I have some questions. So should I send you by email or should I just post here in Teams?
You can also fill out the quiz. But if you are refusing to do the quiz, you can also send it to me because you don't care about your attendance. But if you send it in the quiz, then I have everything in one place. That would be good.
Okay, I'll send by the quiz. I'll send in a quiz. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
What's the question?
Right.
What's
Can
the question?
please write a magic word?
What kind of magic word?
A word, like whichever one you want.
So the answer is magic word, correct? So
You can no. It's any kind of word that makes magic manifest. It's different in different languages, actually.
Oh, yes. Okay.
In German, we use hex, or okay. Yes, we have a first review class later. Rachel, tonight is a little bit in an hour. Yes, we have our first review class today. And we do the same material always on Friday. So did anyone else have trouble with the audio today? Moon had some problems. Could you let me know if it was it something on her side or was it something? There was some interference at the monastery.